Today's lesson is going to cover section 12.3 entitled the diencephalon. So our goal for today is to describe the location of the diencephalon and name its subdivisions and their functions. So the diencephalon is going to consist of three paired gray matter structures. So first we have the thalamus, then we have the hypothalamus and the epithalamus. So if we're looking just at the root words of the hypothalamus and the epithalamus, hypo we know means below or decrease, epi meaning above. So based on those root words alone, we can already start to put a picture together of where the diencephalon and the three parts of it are going to be located. All three of them are going to enclose the third ventricle. So if we are looking at a mid-sagittal section of the brain, here we have the hypothalamus. So this dark purple structure here. The thalamus, which is going to enclose the third ventricle, is this egg-shaped structure here. One important thing that we see inside of that is this interthalamic adhesion, which is just going to be the intermediate mass of the thalamus. And then finally we have the epithalamus. So that's going to have two parts to it. It's going to have the posterior commissure here, and it's also going to enclose the pineal gland, this light purple structure that we find outside there. Okay, so if we're looking at an actual cross-section of a human brain, we can see the thalamus, the body here, our epithalamus, those two parts, that posterior commissure, and the pineal gland off the edge here, and then the hypothalamus in here. One other important thing that we're going to get to too is this mammillary body here, so something to keep in mind as we move along. Okay. So the thalamus itself is a bilateral egg-shaped nuclei that forms the superior lateral walls of that third ventricle. It's what makes up about 80% of our diencephalon. It also is connected by that interthalamic adhesion, so that smaller little circle within that egg shape. So it's going to contain several nuclei, which we'll look at here in just a second, that are each named for their location. These nuclei have specific tasks that project and receive fibers and information coming from the cerebral cortex. So each one of them has a specific job that's going to then relay that information to a specific place. A little fun fact of the day, the thalamus is actually Greek for inner room. Very deep. But our thalamus is one of the deeper, most inner parts of our brain. Okay, so if we're looking at that thalamus, you can see it's got these two little egg-shaped structures here. So there's two of them, they're paired, and then within them we have these very specific nuclei that kind of just look like funhouse balls or a ball pit here. Okay. So the thalamus, its main function is to act as a relay station, like I said, for information coming into the cortex. So it's going to sort, edit that, relay it, and send it exactly where it needs to go. Things like impulses from the hypothalamus for regulating emotion and visceral or organ functions. Impulses coming from the cerebellum and the basal nuclei help direct our motor movements. Impulses for memory or sensory integration. Overall, it acts to mediate sensations, motor activities, cortical arousal, learning, and memory. So super important functions that it has. Now the hypothalamus is going to be located below the thalamus. It's going to form a cap over our brainstem and those inferior walls of the third ventricle. It contains many important nuclei, such as those mammillary bodies that we talked about earlier, just a second ago. These are going to be paired anterior nuclei that act as olfactory relay stations. I don't know if you remember from our last sections, but olfaction or olfactory is going to be our sense of smell. So it's going to be a smell relay station. One other thing that it has is the infundibulum. It's going to be a stalk that connects to the pituitary gland. Now, especially when we get into the endocrine system and our hormones, the pituitary gland is going to be critical, something that we're going to delve deep into, and we're going to look at a little bit further here as well. So if we actually are going to look at our hypothalamus, So same, almost kind of like a triangle shape. You can see it right in there. It's going to meet our pituitary gland. This infundibulum is going to be the stalk that connects the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. And then you can see these specific nuclei inside of that and where that sends relay station. So the mammillary body is going to be off the back here. The hypothalamus is our main visceral control center and regulation center, and we absolutely need this to maintain our homeostasis. Any damage to the hypothalamus can be very life-threatening and could result in death for these specific reasons. So the chief homeostasis controls that it looks over is our autonomic nervous system. So things that we can't necessarily control with our own volition. So blood pressure, rate and force of heartbeat, digestive tract motility, pupil size. So think about when you're in a situation that is high stress or causes a lot of nerves, your blood pressure goes up. Usually your heart rate goes up too. Just to get a little cheeky with you, the digestive tract motility. I know plenty of people, and as my years as an athletic trainer have been around a lot of athletes that describe what they call like nervous poops, that they have to go to the bathroom right before a game because they're so amped up and their adrenaline is through the roof, and stress in a good way also affects our digestive tract mobility. It's also going to initiate physical responses to emotion. So that limbic system that we talked about, which is our emotional center, it's going to be able to perceive pleasure, fear, rage, biological rhythms, and drive. So sex drive is an example of one. So it's going to act through the autonomic nervous system pathways to initiate most physical expressions of our emotions. So these physical expressions, like if you, were just scared or watching a scary movie, your heart might be pounding. We know that our blood pressure increases. You may also get sweaty palms, sweaty upper lip, and dry mouth. So again, it's going to initiate these physical responses that we have based on an emotion or an event. The hypothalamus also regulates our body temperature, so it initiates sweating to help us if we're starting to get overheated. It's going to be able to sense that, or shivering if we're trying to, retain body heat. We know that that's how our body helps to protect itself and maintain a homeostasis. It also regulates hunger and satiety in response to nutrient blood levels or hormones. So if your blood sugar level is really low, it's going to initiate that hunger response. Same thing if you are really, really full, it's going to deliver hormones to our bloodstream to help break that food down, and also sometimes, like in the example of turkey, tryptophan makes you really sleepy. It's also going to regulate our water balance and thirst, so it's going to cause the feeling of thirst. And I'm sure you've heard this many places that if you already feel like you're thirsty, it means you're probably already dehydrated at that point. But it's going to help us to recognize that. It's also going to trigger the release of ADH, which is sorry, my computer just shut down. Oh, sorry. So ADH is an antidiuretic hormone. So diuretics are things that make you go to the bathroom. So it's going to, the release of an antidiuretic hormone is going to cause our kidneys to retain water, that we don't have enough of it in our bloodstream, so it's going to hang on to whatever we have left. The hypothalamus produces it. The pituitary gland is going to be what releases it. So very high levels of ADH may be dangerous because they can cause fluid imbalances that lead to seizures or cerebral edema, so that would be swelling on our brain. Conditions like heart failure may also cause people to have higher levels of ADH. If a person is dehydrated, they're also going to release that antidiuretic hormone, which is going to signal, like I said, the kidneys to keep that water in our urine, to keep and retain it. So one other important thing that it does is it regulates our sleep-waking cycles. So the suprachiasmatic nucleus of the thalamus is what sets our biological clock. Now, in this sense, we don't mean, when we're supposed to be having babies, but our biological clock are our sleep-wake cycles. So you've probably seen these newfangled alarm clocks that instead of pulsing or, making some sort of a beep, they actually mimic the rising of the sun and the sunlight. So that's supposed to naturally wake you up. So it's also going to control our endocrine functions in two really important ways. So the hypothalamus is going to release or inhibit hormones by the anterior pituitary gland. So we know that not only is it important sometimes that we release things, but it's also important that some hormones are inhibited. The supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei produce those hormones, antidiuretic hormone, which we talked about a little bit earlier, and oxytocin. Oxytocin is a really cool and interesting hormone. You may have heard it in a couple different senses. Some people call the oxytocin our cuddle hormone or the love hormone because when you snuggle up to a person or you bond with them socially, oxytocin gets released. So even playing with your dog can cause an oxytocin surge because it makes you so happy. But it can also intensify memories of bonding gone wrong. Such in cases, people having like a poor relationships with one of their parents. Usually it's an opposite sex parent, so men having a poor relationship with their mother, or women having a poor relationship with your father. It can also make you less accepting of people that you deem as outsiders. So instead of feeling like you want to warm up to a stranger, you may suddenly feel suspicious of them, depending on the environment. One other important thing that oxytocin does is if you've ever heard of a woman having labor induced, so meaning that baby is not coming naturally, they're going to give the woman oxytocin, which is going to initiate uterine contractions and start the birthing process. So pretty cool stuff. Oxytocin does a lot of interesting things. Oxytocin in men facilitates bonding. One really interesting study, and it's kind of strange that they did this, is I think this was in Germany. They did a study on dads who took a nasal spray of oxytocin, and it made them want to play and bond more closely with their newborn baby, like around 5 to 6 months old, than dads who didn't get that. So it's really important in our bonding, how we bond and love and form relationships with people. Okay. So disturbances to our hypothalamus can cause a number of things, such as obesity, or on the flip side of that, severe body wasting, sleep disturbances, dehydration, emotional imbalances. So at least the last three, I think we've all experienced at some point. Sleep disturbance, dehydration, not taking care of yourself, not ingesting enough fluids, not taking in enough nutrients, and then emotional imbalances too, such as stress. So these are going to all kind of circle and affect one another. You're stressed, so you're not sleeping. You're not sleeping, so you're not taking care of yourself, and you may be getting dehydrated. This can also be damaged by tumors, radiation, surgery, or a particular type of trauma. And usually when we mean trauma, we don't mean like a traumatic experience. We mean like a severe car accident, damage to that part of the brain, etc. And finally, our epithalamus is going to be the most dorsal portion of the diencephalon. It's going to form that roof of the third ventricle. So it's going to contain our pineal gland or pineal body. And this is really important because it secretes melatonin that also helps to regulate our sleep-wake cycle. Okay, so if we take a look at that epithalamus, this pineal gland down here, this little guy that hangs off, and then the posterior commissure down here are what form the epithalamus. Okay, so that's where we are going to stop for today. We'll pick up with section 12.4 later.